Welcome to this live webinar hosted by GEP. I'm very pleased to be with you today. My name is Jamie Ogilvie-Smalls. I'm a Vice President and member of GEP's Global Leadership Team. I'm based in London. My role is to support Europe-based global clients. GEP is very active in thought leadership for supply chain and procurement topics. Our publications can be found on our website, gep.com. Our thought leadership app, GEP Go, which can be downloaded on the app stores, and via our social accounts such as LinkedIn. And as part of that thought leadership, we publish two main Outlook reports each year. One is the Supply Chain and Procurement Outlook, which provides insights on global trends. And the other is on the Outlook for 2022 in selected spend categories. And that's what we're going to be covering today. We've got selected subject matter experts discussing key trends and risks in their specialist areas and the strategies that have helped us support our clients when dealing with the rapidly evolving landscapes in these categories. These insights should therefore help other procurement leaders address their own challenges and opportunities in 2022. I do want to stress that the procurement landscape is changing rapidly with major developments that have really thrown procurement and supply chain issues into the public consciousness. And so it's more important than ever to stay on top of these major developments, understand best practices, and act quickly to mitigate risks and maximize opportunities for our organizations and, in our case, our customers. So our agenda for today, we will do a short introduction of GEP. And then after that, I'll pass on to our category experts to deep dive into 4 categories. Today we have Rob, Anish, Paul, and Balash. And this builds on the last 2 weeks where we've had, this is the third in a series of 3, where we've covered other spend categories as well. Really delighted to have the team on the session. And at the end of the session, across all of the categories, we'll have a Q&A time. So firstly, let me introduce the GEP team for the session today. So we have Rob Jones. Rob has got more than 20 years of procurement experience across a broad range of categories, including IT, raw materials, packaging, etc. But he's primarily focused in HR and professional services and done a lot of work in this area. That's across many different industry verticals, both in industry, banking, insurance, consumer goods, telco, and others, as well as in professional services. Rob's really focused on the global category trends and sourcing strategies, as well as also supplier relationship management across complex organizations. And Rob's one of our subject matter experts and members and leaders of our category advisory group in the HR and professional services area. We have Anish, who's got over 11 years of experience working with clients focused on large-scale global engagements to drive cost reduction, process efficiency, and transformation. He's worked a lot in professional services as a category, specifically with a sub-focus on legal services. That's what he'll be covering today. He's worked also across many industries, CPG, pharma and healthcare, high-tech, logistics, banking and financial services, etc. Anish is based out of London. We have Paul. He's an experienced consultant and procurement practitioner as well, with over 15 years of experience. He's got also experience across many categories. He's going to focus heavily on travel, which is a specialist area for him. He's also worked in others such as marketing, print, etc. And he's really worked, again, in many multinational blue chip organizations across a number of sectors as well, including FMCG, manufacturing, IT, and pharma. And actually, the first one who's going to kick us off today is Balash. Balash is a member of our team based in Prague in the Czech Republic. He's a procurement professional with over 10 years of experience, so again, across a variety of indirect categories, but primarily focused on professional services and has worked in manufacturing, healthcare, and agriculture. So just a few points on the webinar structure. So all of you will have joined in listen-only mode. That's the way things are set up. What will happen is, as you go through, and certainly at the end of the session, we'll have the Q&A window located under the GEP logo on your webinar console. You can ask questions there. Remember to hit submit after you've typed your question. And then at the end of all of the sessions, Rob will facilitate a Q&A across the team. And we will make copies of the webinar presentation materials available to you. So last point for me before I hand over to the real experts is to just introduce GEP just very briefly for 1 minute for those of you who don't know us well. So we're a leading global specialist in supply chain and procurement. We have around 500 customers and around 6,000 employees in 24 offices globally, managing over 300 billion in spend annually on behalf of our clients. We offer services in strategy, providing consulting services specialized in procurement and supply chain, as well as managed services where we run elements of procurement and supply chain for our clients. And we're also a technology company. We develop and run our own software platforms, including GEP Smart and GEP Next, which cover procurement and supply chain needs. And we're recognized as a leader on a global basis by many reputable industry analysts such as Forrester, Gartner, etc. So with that, I'm now going to hand over to Balázs to talk about professional services. Over to you, Balázs. Please take it away. Balázs, are you on mute? I think Balázs may have a challenge. If he does, then perhaps we will move to the next and come back to Balázs. Maybe that's the best way to do it. So why don't we move on to Rob then? Rob, do you want to go ahead and take your one first, and hopefully we can get Balázs back. Sorry, Rob, you need to wait a second. I don't think we're quite up and running yet. Please apologies, everyone. We'll just get this sorted shortly.
Okay, thanks, Jamie, and hello, everybody, and thank you for joining the session today. My name is Rob Jones, and as Jamie says, I'm a senior category manager for corporate and professional services at GEP, and I'll spend 15 minutes or so today just talking to you about HR services and fleet. And just some of the key trends and challenges and opportunities that we see within those two category areas, as well as some of the strategies and approaches that we're seeing with some of our clients and that we're deploying with our clients to look to address those challenges and deliver against those opportunities. So just first thing to say, HR services and fleet, in the main, those are global categories, but we're going to try and focus really on the European market, whilst reflecting on the global nature of these categories as well. So we could just flip into the first slide, and then I'll just talk through human resources services first. So we just move into the next slide. Okay, so when we consider HR services, this is a broad and wide-ranging category area actually, but the key areas that we're going to focus on today are talent acquisition and recruitment, temporary workforce and contingent labour, and employee benefits and reward. So typically, there's lots of overlap in each of these areas, these category areas. But in today's environment, the interdependence between permanent and the contingent workforce is even more apparent, and the criticality of employee benefits is even more crucial. And procurement teams are going to play an important role in each of those areas. So I'll cover each area separately, but I'll also highlight some of the main kind of overlapping and interlinking parts to those categories. So just touching on talent acquisition first of all. So looking at some of the key challenges. So number one challenge for organisations, and this is no surprise, is the attraction and retention of talent, both permanent and temporary workers. Actually, as is well documented, the recruitment market at the moment is very, very hot, and there's a real battle for talent out there between organisations. So post-COVID has seen recovery of job placements and vacancies across the entire region. But the challenges with availability of the right skills and the expertise has meant organisations have really struggled to fulfil that demand. This has been exacerbated by the Great Resignation, with companies really struggling to retain staff. So employees are either refocusing on their career ambitions, or they're taking advantage of effectively being in a seller's market and looking to optimize or improve and maximize their own salaries. This imbalance in supply and demand is forecast by many industry commentators to continue well into 2023. So we need to try and sort of address those challenges now. Also, the cost of living crisis and inflation rates across Europe that we've not seen for almost a generation is placing further pressure on pay rates, which is a key cost component in talent acquisition and temporary labour as well. So shortages of resource and expertise, coupled with inflationary pay rates and the higher probability of staff leaving, means that procurement teams are required to play a really important role alongside HR and the talent acquisition teams in finding innovative solutions to dealing with these challenges. So what does this mean? This means that procurement really need to look beyond their normal supply channels for solutions. That's not about disregarding these channels, as there's still going to be huge value and hugely supportive in delivering against these challenges, but looking at diversified strategies. So things like the importance of digital channels to identify and engage with prospective talent. Looking at direct channels will be increasingly important, considering talent pools that maybe need to be nurtured. So looking perhaps towards the long term, so investing in apprenticeships and graduate programs as well. And also things like project-based RPO activities to target specific programs, recruitment programs, or recruitment needs within the organization. So short-term targeted activities, and these are all tools that can be deployed to alleviate each of these challenges. So moving on to temporary workforce, as mentioned, these areas need to be viewed in the round because they are so interlinked, particularly between permanent and temporary workforce. And with temporary workforce, the expectation is that temporary work placements will increase in 2022 and beyond as organisations look to temporary workers to potentially backfill permanent roles and vacancies they have in that space. But also they'll look to temporary workers to support business growth ambitions. And we see this particularly in markets and industries that have refocused their strategies post-COVID, so in particular areas such as digital or supply chain or logistics. But procurement teams also need to be mindful of regulatory changes that are coming into force across Europe that will continue to strengthen temporary workers' rights as well, and those need to be built into procurement strategies moving forward. Whether that be collective labour agreements in the Netherlands, minimum pay arrangements in Germany, or permitted reasons of usage of temporary labour in Spain, these all need to be understood and built into the sourcing strategies and procurement strategies moving forward. Or indeed, those that might engage via digital or service platforms, particularly in relation to particularly in relation to the gig economy workforce. The other factor to consider are some of the geopolitical situations and the impact on the workforce as well. So, for example, the situation in Ukraine may seem separate to temporary labour and recruitment. But Ukraine was a real growth market for some of the in-demand skills, such as digital and financial consulting and project delivery. And we're also seeing it was also a big source of migratory workforce for some of the more blue-collar workforces roles as well. So, we will see some impact from some knock-on impact from the unfortunate situation in Ukraine. So whilst temporary workforce supply may present some relief to the permanent workforce, it is facing its own challenges that need to be addressed. And some of the main focus areas that we're seeing in here in this particular space are particularly around strengthening those supplier relationships and really using their expertise of your partners and insight to support navigating through these some of these challenges. We're also seeing the optimization of technology solutions. So where organizations have already implemented VMS solutions, also looking to optimize those, to really look to sort of improve demand and forecasting of roles, particularly within the temporary or the blue collar workspace. So with this in mind, organizations are placing an even greater emphasis on the importance of reward and benefits, actually. So again, for both permanent and temporary, as a way to try and attract and retain staff. So just moving on to employee benefits then. So looking beyond salaries and pay, benefits are the next main tool that organizations can deploy. And procurement teams are helping HR colleagues in finding innovative solutions or greater value from those investments that they make in the employee benefits and reward programs. We're also seeing a changing model of benefits as well. So the typical benefits, core benefits of health, life, pension, and indeed car, will still be important, and procurement can support in accessing the best products and costs in those areas. But we're also seeing a greater emphasis on employee health and well-being, particularly in supporting return to work programs, or indeed changing working behaviours for employees. So we're seeing things like wider programs for employee assistance, or supporting flexibility of workers, and that could be this hybrid home and office working. So supporting with office setup and IT setup, so people can work seamlessly from home and between the office as well. We're also seeing that improved choice of optional benefits as well, really to sort of reflect the change in lifestyles and needs of employees moving forward. Benefits are also having an increased focus for temporary labour, which they haven't necessarily had in the past. So things like sign-on or loyalty bonuses are perhaps very well publicised in the current environment to encourage temporary workers to join and to stay on assignments. But we're also seeing other things like referral bonuses or guaranteed hours or more flexible shift patterns, and indeed sort of transportation for workers, particularly when we're looking at blue collar work, the blue collar workforce. Okay, so finally, some of the approaches we're seeing in this area from a procurement perspective, we are seeing organisations really kind of focusing on rebidding some of their core program offerings more frequently. So things like health insurance and life insurance. So there's a real focus on that. We're also seeing tech optimization, so benefit platforms that are being implemented to manage right across the program, both from a global perspective or a regional perspective and across the organization, but also to include not just the core reward programs, but also some of those optional benefits as well. And this really ensures that employees can get the most from their benefit plans. So we're also looking at seeing extended offerings to reflect flexible working and a focus on health and well-being. Additionally, there's also greater focus on learning and development, which I haven't necessarily touched on in this space in any great detail, but people development programs are a real focus, really to enable people to grow and develop their careers in the organization. So if you just move on to the next slide, please. So just to recap on some of the key challenges and some of the opportunities to address. So talent acquisition. So we expect to see demand and competition for skills to continue to be high, and this will lead to a greater focus on people development. We are seeing the diversity of channel will be hugely important, as well as strong relationships with existing, recruitment partners. Diversity, equality, and inclusion as an overall organizational objective will also need to be a key component in procurement strategies for recruitment. From a temporary workforce perspective, so supplier collaboration is going to be crucial in this area to ensure access to skills and resources. Pay rates are increasing, demand is outstripping supply, and these are factors that procurement teams can't fix in isolation. So we really advise utilising their expertise to help navigate these challenging times. The other aspect is total workforce management. So this has been a well-visited strategy over the past few years with mixed success in terms of delivery. So we are seeing this as an opportunity to revisit as a procurement strategy and get that total overview of the workforce, whether that's permanent or indeed the extended workforce, from contingent workers through to consulting and contractors. And then finally, just on employee benefits. So this is going to be an increasingly important tool in attracting and retaining staff. Procurement's going to be an important partner in identifying the right benefits and products and options. And it's going to be important to get the most from those investments moving forward. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to fleet now. So we can just move on to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, just turning our attention to fleets. So fleet programs in Europe, whether that be commercial job need or benefit vehicles, is going through a huge period of change at the moment, and fleet buyers are having to react and adapt quickly in this environment. So the first challenge is that whilst demand in Europe has gradually recovered post-COVID, particularly in relation to commercial vehicles and electric vehicles, this recovery has been impacted by a number of different factors, not least the fact that supply has been throttled by a reduction in new car production. This really started in 2021 during the height of the pandemic, with a staggering 11 million vehicles that were removed from production capacity on a global basis. We're expected to see that reduction in capacity of around about 7 million in 2022. And even into 2023, when some normality will return, we're still expecting a reduction in capacity of around about 1 million vehicles in production on pre-pandemic levels. So thinking just beyond COVID, this impact and reduction is also driven by the semiconductor shortages in the market, and also supply chain delays that have seen some sites run very low on parts and production schedules adjusted to take this into account. I guess with all of this, the predictable results is that it's led to shortages of available vehicles and a knock-on effect of lower long lead times for deliveries, as well as increases in prices, which leads me into the next point of inflation. So inflation, like lots of category areas for fleets, is a major factor into 2022 and likely to continue beyond. And that's going to impact both the vehicle cost and budgets of fleet buyers moving forward. So supply versus demand has definitely impacted price, has had an impact on price, but also record energy costs, significant increase in raw material costs, and pay rate pressures for labour. These are all key cost components, are leading to increases in new vehicle purchase prices across Europe. And we're seeing increases of between 10 and 26% from pre-pandemic price points for vehicles across Europe. Coupled with this, OEM and dealers are not helping in the sense that they are also holding back on discounts for vehicles, so corporate discounts for vehicles, and so this is also having an impact on the purchase price moving forward. One side benefit of these shortages actually for fleet buyers is what we are seeing is a buoyant second-hand car market. And so that's having a positive impact on residual values of lease vehicles. And so these are holding up quite well, actually. And we're seeing sort of up to 40% residual values, up to 40% better than the year previous. And this is at least providing some relief on net monthly rentals for vehicles. So just looking beyond the immediate demand and supply and cost issues, and considering some of the legacy costs of impact of COVID. So with the exception of some industries, for example, delivery firms, drivers are now driving much less, and the average mileage for fleet is down by around about 10 to 15%. This is providing a tactical opportunity to review contracted mileages that organisations might have, and benefiting from potentially reduced monthly rentals on those vehicles, or indeed looking to extend lease terms and to try to seek to alleviate the lead times and shortages for new vehicles. We're also seeing a change in behaviour in relation to this. Change in behaviour is also challenging organisations to reflect on the future of their fleet programmes. This particularly in relation to benefit fleet cars. and how they fit into reward packages. But it's also for job need cars, and whether other mobility options might be available and more beneficial for employees and more cost effective for employers. Final area to cover off in fleet is in relation to the sustainability agenda and the part that fleet programs can play towards the organization's carbon reduction or net zero targets. In the wide world, governments are introducing regulatory targets, and we've seen a number of increased number of clean air zones in major European cities over the past couple of years, and these will continue into the near future. There's also restrictions on sales of petrol and diesel cars that will come into effect from 2030 through to, in some countries, through to 2040 in others. So organizations are really focused. We're seeing organizations that are becoming really focused on the electrification of their fleets, as this provides a real direct and tangible impact on their sustainability targets. It's also fueling the growth in the EV market with a huge demand for electric vehicles. But we are seeing that European countries are leading the way with incentives to make that switch, but also infrastructure to support and underpin this growth. One area that we do advise in this area is to look at the transition to total cost of ownership when looking to the electrification of your fleet. So this is about considering all the cost aspects and not just the net monthly rental or the maintenance, but also the fuel and tax. That helps you to really make a compelling case to make that switch. So I'm going to just move on to the next slide. So what are some of the key takeaways and things that we're seeing with our clients? So firstly, fleet continues to be an important category, not just in commercial vehicle market, but also in the job need and benefit vehicle market as well. But organizations are being creative in finding innovative solutions to the current challenges, including looking at flexible contracts, alternative mobility modes, and less expensive models to replace their current fleet. As well as focusing on operational efficiencies and driver well-being and technology to help understand driver behavior moving forward. Companies that have adjusted lease contract mileages or extended their term have seen cost adjustments of around about 5 to 10% in monthly lease costs, and this is at least helping to alleviate some of the increases in the purchase price of vehicles. And we would strongly advise anyone who hasn't done so already to open discussions with their fleet management partners to address this. Momentum of the sustainability agenda will continue to gather pace. So clean air zones, as we said, and new regulations are seeing fleet managers and buyers really updating their programs and policies to reflect this. So we're starting to see electricity first fleet programs being introduced, and fleet programs becoming front and center of net zero programs for organizations. We're also seeing alternative funding models, particularly for electric vehicles, such as salary sacrifice schemes, which has really opened up this as a benefit to a much wider employee population. At the same time, buyers should explore new solutions that are being offered by some of the manufacturers and fleet management companies. So looking at things like usage-based agreements, mobility alternatives, and more of a focus on the total cost of travel and the part that fleet plays in this. So not just considering the cost of the car, but also thinking about things like tolls and parking, but also kind of wider travel that employees might take, train, plane, taxis, etc. So in this category, there's lots of challenges to grapple with, but also lots of opportunities for fleet buyers to make a positive impact, and not just on cost, but also the broader ESG agenda. With that, I'll now hand you over to Anish, who will talk you through the legal strategy. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Rob, for the walkthrough on the HR services side. Quite insightful. We'll get on to legal services now. I think we're talking a little bit around the law firms aspect. There are other aspects around legal services and legal tech that we will briefly touch upon as well, but largely focusing on how procurement as well as the whole legal function, which includes your chief legal officer and legal counsels, can effectively engage with outside firms, both law firms as well as legal service providers. So could we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So when we talk about the overall legal services space, and just taking a little back to the start of the pandemic, which obviously impacted a lot of these categories, including legal. We're seeing a lot of changes that are coming back from 2021 onwards uh, in sort of the ways of working in this category, which are necessarily um, not sort of temporary changes. So these are almost like redefining how we work with legal firms. So what are sort of the key trends or challenges which impact this category? We've seen a sweeping change of regulatory impacts all across the globe. There have been sort of varying intensity of changes that focus on cybersecurity, data privacy, real estate law, which was fueled a lot by the pandemic in general, environmental regulations that have come into place in a lot of geographies globally, and also sort of the labor and employment related topics that come up in different countries at the moment. In addition, the world saw a sort of step up in terms of mergers and acquisitions throughout 2021. Uh, Reports indicate that 2021 saw a record year in terms of the number of deals that were driven. So obviously that has an impact on the M&A portion, and therefore the kind of firms that corporates are looking to engage with there. 2022 shows that the outlook in terms of these number of deals will likely continue at the same pace. Now, one topic that we touched upon earlier around talent engagement, again, is playing quite a deep role in this category. Law firms face increased pressures today to sort of retain their talent. So what this effectively means is you see wage increases within their firms to be able to hold on to price talent. We've also seen that result in terms of increased rates that come onto corporates. Obviously, inflation is also playing quite a bit of a critical role here. At the same time, we've also seen a few corporates following the kind of key people that they were working with in firms. So if people are switching from one firm to another, buoyed by either wage or other reasons, we've seen corporates also changing law firms, and that obviously plays into the overall legal strategy at the end of the day. Now, alongside all of this, we also see sort of how firms are being engaged. So as I said at the beginning, a lot of these substitutes or alternates are coming up to pure play engagement with corporate law firms. I think over the past sort of 3-4 years, but especially in the past 2 years, we've seen that that alternative legal service providers are being sort of enhancedly used across all geographies. Some firms are also looking at the whole legal process outsourcing part. Again, when we talk about these with sort of our leading clients, the key theme that emerges is that a good discovery is really required before you go out to engage with LPO firms, which means that a lot of thought needs to just go in, and it's not just a pure play outsourcing decision at the end of the day. And the last bit of thing, which is again making a lot of changes in this category, is the increased adoption of legal tech. I think again with the last 2 years, there's been a lot of kind of proof of concepts of what really works or doesn't work. And with that, we've seen a plethora of clients now adopting higher levels of tools which go across, let's say, e-discovery, matter management, litigation and patent support, and also sort of their overall organization making a better use of their contract lifecycle management tools. So with that, with those developments that are happening in these tools and with the increased adoption, overall what we kind of see in this category, there's a moderate to high bargaining power of law firms at the moment. Now, that obviously presents I guess, a great opportunity for our chief legal officers, the legal counsel, along with procurement and finance, who now sort of need to do that extra bit to manage this category well. Excuse me. Um, and and when we look at kind of what were the key areas that is impacting them, so across a survey that was conducted by Thomson Reuters, it shows up that the major burning point on their mind is controlling outside counsel costs. Now, we often get asked a question, how can procurement deeply engage in this category? Because in a lot of clients, um, the legal services category is considered quite sensitive, and we don't have a lot of engagement with procurement. I think these kind of surveys and insights has really open up the door to those conversations in the future, when the chief legal officer's primary priority is to control the outside counsel cost and to be able to use better technology to help simplify their processes. Um, that's the perfect entry point where procurement and finance are able to really show what they should do to be able to control this. Now, there are quite a bit of levers, and again, these in no way are these sort of generic for any of the firms. The challenges, geographies all play a very key role here, but there are probably top three things that the chief legal officer, along with the procurement, should really focus on to be able to achieve their priorities. One is to bring in a good level of cost focus and discipline. When we look at this category with a lot of our clients, um, it's focused maybe on the top one or two, or maybe the top 50% spend cases, but even there, it lacks a focus on the matter management. So the focus is generally on what's my overall legal strategy, but not necessarily hand in hand, what should my strategy be to control these counsel costs as well. So active matter management, you need to focus on detailing out the matter budgets down to the T, and have a very continuous sort of an governance around it, which focuses really on tracking these budgets, on making sure what's being consumed, is it in line with what was agreed at the beginning, and bringing in some more sophisticated tools that can help build that aspect of predictability and forecasting, so you don't end up with surprises in the middle of the year. The second one, this is the perfect time to again go back and relook at your preferred panel of law firms. Now, a lot of clients set up panels, but when you go back and review spend and use of the panel in year 2 or year 3, there's a significant bit of deviation from what the intended strategy was. So again, this needs to be quite well thought out. You need to have strategic panels in place and the tier 1s and tier 2s, and clear guidance on when to use one versus the other. With the increasing usage of sort of alternative fees, the AFAs need to play a bigger role in terms of these engagements. Again, by no means it's to say that all matters can be looked at from an alternative fee perspective and we can do away with the time and material model, but it's really about having a good oversight of what works where. The legal tail spend, again, is something that we've seen is quite growing with our clients, again, because they sort of deviate away from what looks like as a strategic panel. So again, cutting that tail, and again, as I said, revisiting annually and to look at what's working and improvements play a very key role in efficient usage of this preferred panel. And lastly, the third lever that they should look like is on the optimized in-house teams. So we need to continue to look at what the in-house versus outsourced team. So it's almost like a make versus buy analysis that they need to do. CAGR over the last 2 to 3 years. With increased adoption of AI in this space, again, the right technology mix will play a very key role. All right, I'm not sure if you lost me in the middle. I'm just going to sort of recap then maybe again the three things that I just focused on towards the end. So yeah, the cost focus and discipline with the active matter management, detailed matter budgets, looking at an overall total cost tracking. The second aspect is around the preferred panel of law firms. So having a strategic panel in place which you review year on year, have a good set of firms in place characterized by tier ones and tier twos, and revisit this annually. And the third lever is sort of around optimizing what your in-house versus outsourced, in-house versus outside counsel could look like, and a continued focus on adoption of technology in this space, which is seeing quite a bit of rise. So that's sort of on the legal services side. With that, I'm going to hand on to my next speaker, Balash. Over to you.
Hello, hi there. My name is Balash Holzer. I'm category manager at the GEP. First, I'd like to share just a few words about my professional background. I joined GEP slightly more than 2 years ago, and since then I've been supporting mainly one of the largest clients of GEP. Prior to that, I've been in procurement for more than 10 years and worked in different roles and supported various indirect categories, among others, the category professional services that I'm covering in today's session. In the next couple of minutes, I'm going to elaborate on current trends and their impact on the industry, with focus on management consulting and financial services. Let me start with consulting services. After a decline in 2020, driven by the pandemic, the management consulting industry recovered strongly in 2021, and the pandemic itself created several trends that brought the industry back to a growth trajectory. These trends seem to have strong influence on the consulting market landscape, especially on the long run. Europe's consulting industry is currently led by the DACH region, which includes Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Brexit has slowed down a little bit the consulting growth in the UK. It hasn't affected the number of deals, but it has affected the size of the deals. In 2022, we expect companies to continue to adapt to the current challenges in their environment. They will be making strategic changes in their business models. Therefore, they increasingly tend to partner with external consulting firms to get these changes implemented as soon as possible. Nevertheless, they want to make it happen at reasonable costs, which has already led to a strong competition among consulting companies, as more and more freelance and boutique firms are entering the market, providing lower quotes compared to the big consulting firms. Recruitment and retaining of talents are expected to remain a significant challenge for all professional services firms. The new virtual working model has brought advantages for both sides. It's a positive change that the talent pool for specific regions has increased as the world is adapting to the new working model. But at the same time, pandemic burnout is causing an increase in the attrition rate. Also, the rapid growth of the technology sector in recent years created extra tension in the area of recruitment, as the technology firms offer competitive salary and at the same time interesting and challenging work, which makes recruitment and retaining of talents even harder for the consulting firms. Another positive effect that global firms have the advantage of being able to easily leverage specialized resources from faraway regions to meet clients' unique project requirements. Digital projects around data visualization, process automation, agile transformation have become more and more common and requested by the clients. There is an increasing trend that big consulting companies acquire firms to expand their capabilities and service offerings. These acquisitions support the ambition of the big consulting firms to increase the range of technology services they can provide to their clients. As these technologies are real game changers for the clients when it comes to how to operate more efficiently. As companies' challenges grow sometimes increasingly complex, the multi-sourcing model has become more and more popular. Companies are now breaking their large projects into smaller ones and then hiring multiple consultants with unique capabilities to handle these smaller sub-projects. There is also a big change in the pricing models being used. More and more companies are challenging the traditional billing structures and move from a time and materials approach to an outcome-based fee structure. Let me continue with financial services. As we saw in the example of consulting services, financial services industry has rebounded in 2021 as well and expected to continue its growth in 2022. In financial services category, where we consider services like auditing, accounting, tax, and financial advisory, there has been a fundamental shift from the traditional working model to a hybrid model. This model allows auditing and taxation services to be executed from remote locations, creating savings opportunities for both service provider and client. In auditing, there are internal controls in place to avoid errors in business processing. These controls are often manual and labor intensive. Automation of such internal controls can reduce audit costs as well as financial reporting risks. As automation of business processes generally increases productivity and reduces manual work, procurement professionals may take advantage of such automation services and negotiate for potential reduction in fees. The implementation of different AI applications, diagnostic tools, and analytics will reduce the workload of internal as well as external auditing firms. This will allow auditing teams and firms to shift from supporting activities to more strategic reviews while reducing the overall time needed. In the coming years, increased regulation around corporate taxation and tax avoidance will generate higher need for tax consulting services. One of these regulations will be the new global tax reform that was endorsed by the leaders of the world's 20 biggest economies. This regulation aims to set a minimum global tax to make it harder for the global giants to avoid taxation by establishing offices in the tax havens. Although the reforms may be delayed due to local implementation, we will see multinational corporations starting to plan for these reforms already in 2022. Since consulting services as well as financial services are very labor-intensive services, there is a strong inflationary pressure due to increased pay, recruitment, and training costs that professional services companies will definitely try to pass on to the clients. Finally, I'd like to point out a few strategies or levers procurement professionals can use to keep consulting and financial services costs under control. Number one, it's always worth to consider long-term relationship with suppliers that are engaged for multiple projects, and also to use outcome-based fee structures instead of using the traditional time and material-based approach. Establishing strong and effective internal control on consulting demands and extensively leveraging the in-house consulting team can also be a powerful approach to reduce the external consulting spend. If you are running competitive bidding process, it could be useful to include different supplier segments in the process. This approach can help to drive the prices lower. Nearshoring is also a possibility to optimize the costs. In Europe, for example, there are consultants based in low-cost countries like Czech Republic or Romania that charge lower rates compared to consultants based in Germany or UK. Normally with tier 2 and especially with niche consulting firms, there is greater chance for the buyers to successfully negotiate about the pricing, while these consulting firms may also bring in the required expertise and experience. Procurement professionals should also pay attention to the right consultant mix on a case-to-case basis to avoid that the company is paying the invoices based on the rates of the highly experienced consultant, as some tasks may be executed by consultants with less experience. So this is all I wanted to cover today, and now I'm handing over to Paul, who will speak about the category travel.
Yes, thanks, Ballas. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Paul Wakelin, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the travel forecast going forward. So, as we know, travel has gone through a massive chapter of battering and reorganisation over the last 2 years with the pandemic. With these restrictions being lifted bit by bit, there is a chance for programmes to gain better traction with tracking, reporting on environmental impacts of suppliers and sustainability initiatives. So travellers can make informed decisions on the suppliers they use for their trips. In addition, organisations are recalibrating their policies and budgets around this highly emotive category. So according to Global Business Travel Association, GBTA research, only about half of companies surveyed will take action to focus on environmental and sustainability post the pandemic. The challenges around the environmental and green energy demands of the consumer, plus global lobbyists pushing the industry to think very innovatively in transitioning away from damaging carbon footprints and introducing lower carbon impact strategies in fuels. The balance between the cost of green energy and the bottom line, still recovering from the last 2 years, is clear. So from an air perspective, air is slow to recover, and carriers continue to face those significant financial pressures due to the debt impacted by COVID, and also low passenger demand and the constant volatility of individual country regulations limiting that certainty. With domestic air travel emerging, profits are still being impacted as the more lucrative long-haul demand is yet to be realised. And while there are further acquisitions and joint ventures, such as Italia Trasporto Aereo buying Air Italia and the like, optimizing portfolios are lagging. So ticket prices are expected to rise in the midterm, impacted by the rising oil price and the situation in Ukraine. In a bid to further optimize costs, airlines are looking to revise capacity on routes more often, stop meal services potentially, and further review NDC pricing bundles with GDS providers. So there's a greater impact through first class travel in comparison to economy. So an organisation's reduction in this sector can greatly reduce the carbon impact. This is a strategy that needs to be reviewed as the results are significant, with 4-to-1 first class versus economy flights taken, and the business versus leisure sectors far higher in corporate travel. So airlines are now investing in sustainable aviation fuel as an alternative to jet fuel that uses non-petroleum feedstock and offers lower life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. Besides the global ESG pressures and obvious lobbying by environmental groups, procurement has been a key influencer to drive the corporate social responsibility of organisations, together with the cost implications impacting a travel programme in the shift to SAF. So with hotels, the relaxation of restrictions and due to the ramping up of country vaccination programs, hotels are recovering generally, underpinned by the leisure sector of the industry currently. From a recent BTN survey, more than half of buyers are looking to roll over pricings, with 1 in 4 planning to execute an RFP in 2022. Now, a key challenge with properties is the scarcity of resources, with many employees, as Rob touched on, having left the industry to find an alternative security in employment. So many hotels have had to increase salaries by 15 to 20% in some countries to secure the appropriate standard of experience and service. Technology has been a key trend to accelerate during the pandemic, with touchless and sometimes humanless check-in and check-out procedures, with contactless engagement for end-to-end stays. This is due to the stringent cleaning and sterile procedures required to drive confidence and comply with strict policies. Prices will remain pretty volatile with the local impacts of COVID and the inability for chains to add or remove inventory in response to changes in challenging demand patterns. For European markets, towards the end of last year, RevPAR saw an increase of around 60% compared to 2020. However, RevPAR is still 30 to 40% below pre-pandemic levels. In addition, capacity has shown some signs of recovery, from 15 to 20% at the height of restricted travel policies to 50 to 60% last summer. So countries who rely on the leisure markets, such as Spain and France, have remained stronger and buoyant in comparison to others that rely on the more business and corporate markets, such as UK and Germany. So looking forward, it will be a strategic priority to have a dual approach, with a fixed cap acting as the cap, or including rate caps to avoid paying the higher rates. Along with this, procurement needs to continually review the program and drive as much spend to strategic partners to leverage as much as possible. So with TMCs, there's an opportunity for procurement to leverage this recalibration of travel. TMCs have been through a drastic overhaul with pricing, internal restructuring, and refocusing their strategies to manage the new normal of post-pandemic travel. TMC's role in the new normal will be under great scrutiny regarding duty of care, policy updates, country entry documents, and vaccination certificates. So TMCs need to be able to have a seamless service to communicate and support an organization's travelers on demand and efficiently deliver emergency service. Coronavirus is here to stay, and we must live with it, with a foundation to support as standard. So with the current rise in oil and situation in Ukraine, plus as mentioned, there will be spikes in coronavirus, like the current one in Shanghai in China. So clients really need to review their travel policy, so you're prepared for emergency measures to manage a spike in coronavirus or situation in Europe impacted by the current Eastern European escalation, so that you can you can quickly direct your travelers what to do, as this may become the normal, with changes impacting throughout the next few years. So procurement must challenge these suppliers to crystallize the true value of the service and take them to task on the environmental and sustainable impacts they are making, as it is the easy part to talk of what initiatives you are driving as a TMC or travel supplier. Actually delivering the reality and measurable results of these innovations is a significant action that must be realized. The increasing millennials and Generation Z in the workplace have had a significant impact in evolving technology. Integrations with assistants like Siri, with Google Assistant, Cortana, has led to real-time updates of itineraries, and TMCs will be significantly playing their part in harnessing this opportunity as part of their offering. The coming year will bring a ramping up of travel, and TMCs need to be ready with the resources and guidance to support travellers. Clients should review their customer satisfaction and be ready to collaborate with TMCs to adjust to new normal as it unfolds with their program. From a meetings and events perspective, the pandemic has demonstrated how we can all perform our roles virtually and recognise how a volume of trips just aren't a priority, and the use of virtual tools drives time and cost efficiencies. So in addition, mindful travellers want to reduce their impact on the planet when they travel. So taking a less impactful form of transport will be preferred. So for example, taking the train rather than a high carbon fuel flight to your destination will be preferable. So the pandemic has produced a major shift in meetings events. The focus now is much more on hybrid meetings and events with metrics, not so much on savings and strategic spend and supplier base, but more on engagement through interactivity in a virtual event, camera on, attendee journey, return on investment, speaking time. So meeting planners need to cater for attendees who would rather participate virtually, and also hotel partners need to participate to facilitate these hybrid events. Virtual meeting platforms has significantly ramped up, and the current global working environment, accelerated by the pandemic, has a new virtual workplace. So this has driven a new opportunity for these hybrid meeting tech companies, and the expected volumes for this year are only 25% of pre-COVID levels. There's a clear segment and need for this format and platform to support. Now, Rob spoke a little bit about fleet, and just to add to that, from the car rental side, demand is recovering and prices are increasing due to scarcity in new cars due to component shortages. There is a niche group of customers seeking eco rentals. So with these green cars now becoming available in the marketplace, customers are encouraged to fill up on 100% biodiesel, which is a fuel from vegetable oil made from local restaurants, for example. There's a growing trend of savvy customers who are now dumping their own vehicles for a car sharing approach using a decentralized fleet of generally low emission vehicles positioned in densely populated neighborhoods to get around. So early innovators in car sharing services state that for every shared car on the road, nearly 15 gasoline-powered vehicles are taken off the road. So in addition to implementing sustainability with their core assets and consumables, early green innovators in the car rental industry are making sustainable transitions in the operational part of their business. So for example, many companies don't use pesticides or toxic cleaners on their vehicles. In addition, they use biodegradable soaps to wash the outside of the vehicles, and a vinegar and baking soda mixture for the interior. Also, the use of post-consumer paper and mostly used office equipment also plans to employ solar power as well. So there's a lot of innovations going on from a sustainability perspective there. So in summary, the new normal will shake up the travel industry with revised policies, greater focus on environmental and sustainable impact, and the slow emergence of travel volumes ramping up. If further COVID variants develop, there will be much adaptability coupled with disruption, which the supply base must be ready to step up and manage the challenge. So that's all I've got to share with you today. I'll hand you back to Rob for the QA.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thanks, Balash and Anish as well. So we'll just spend some time now just going through some of the questions that have been posted. So thank you very much for those people that have posted questions. We'll try and get through as many as we can over the next 10, 15, 20 minutes. So first question we had actually, it's not clear which specific, whether it's related to any particular category, but the question is, so what's the expected price change across these categories for the upcoming quarters, taking into account, taking into consideration current war and supply chain disruptions. So I guess maybe we'll go around the table here on this, and perhaps people can kind of touch a little bit on it if it's clear. These things are always a little bit challenging, particularly on a quarterly basis. But perhaps if I look at this just from I guess the areas that I've covered in terms of temporary labour and perhaps into fleet as well. So it's really difficult to give kind of absolutes. Obviously, it can depend on the country and individual kind of economic circumstances in those individual countries. But say from a pay rate perspective, what we're expecting, I guess, across the whole Eurozone is probably kind of an average increase of around about 6%. Is kind of the general forecast in the market. And from our own perspective, that's in line with kind of asks coming from vendors and organisations as well. So I'd say it's pretty much in line with that. How that's going to translate over the kind of coming quarters will remain to be seen. Fleet is again, it's difficult to give an absolute on it. We generally see this as kind of aligned with inflation. The fleet vehicles, lots of things can change, but given the main input costs are closely aligned to inflation, we generally see price increases in line with that. So again, depending on the country, anything between kind of 4% and 8%, maybe more, over the coming quarters as well. So I don't know if anybody else wants to kind of step in for your categories and in terms of any likely increases that you're expecting to see in terms of percentages over the coming quarters or coming year.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, as I said on my last sort of commentary on a hotel perspective, they are looking to increase over the next few months. I think generally, with the disruption in Ukraine and the Russian situation there, the impact to the supply chains in order to get the sort of component parts of service and products through is going to be impacted, and prices are going to go up, and we've seen that happening already. In everywhere really, pretty much. As I said, revenue in hotel rates are looking to go up. People want to try and roll over rates over the next year without doing a global hotel RFP to try and mitigate those rises as much as possible, really, in regards to that. I can't really say on a quarterly basis how that is going to play out, because the truth is we just don't know what's going to happen in Eastern Europe. There's many reports saying it could be over by Christmas, many reports saying it may go on, so it's really difficult to say in regards to that.
Okay, thank you, Paul. It's really helpful. Just moving on to another question. So Anish, there's a question here from a legal perspective. So how does procurement overcome the challenges of establishing a deep engagement with the legal function? If you can kind of share your thoughts on that. Anish, we can't hear you, unfortunately. Maybe I'll cover off another question quickly if you're struggling to rejoin. Okay, so I'll maybe cover off one that's, I suppose, related to the previous points, actually, just around labour. So there's a question just on, so pay rates are increasing and the talent pool is really challenging. So how can we deal with contractual commitments in our contracts with suppliers that they claim that they can no longer meet? Anish, I'll perhaps come back to your question on legal in a moment. So I'll just I'll close on this. So I guess this is around kind of deals that have been put in place pre-pandemic or over the past couple of years, and obviously the world has changed, and we're starting to see suppliers that can no longer claim no longer meet those contractual commitments. So yeah, we've seen that quite a lot recently. So with perhaps contracts pre-pandemic, so the business case has been for change, might be based on savings or cost efficiencies that are now very challenging to meet in this sort of inflationary environment. So and perhaps other service levels and service credits are being undermined as well because they're just not able to deliver on those. So again, there's no really easy answer to this, but I guess recognizing that the environment has changed and adapting plans is sort of the general approach that we've seen taken. And again, that's having close working relationship with existing partners. That's key to, I suppose, unlocking innovative options. So your organization may still want to deliver those cost efficiencies. You may not get any relief on delivering those cost efficiencies, but you may have to look at this. So pay rates may have to move to compete. But can you look at what the market benchmarks are? Can you look at some sort of guarantees and commitments? Are there additional benefits that you might be able to get from your vendors in that space? So I guess more broadly as well, what we've seen in this space, trying to sort of offset some of those costs, is looking at those alternative challenge channels. So thinking about where you have a contractor base, so looking at more kind of remote workers, looking at global operators, or having those workers remotely working from low cost locations. And there's other things like crowdsourcing platforms as well that we've seen sort of good, sort of innovative cost options being delivered as well. So, Anish, if I just come back on that question, hopefully you can hear me. Okay, so yeah, if we just cover off that question. So I guess just to reiterate, so how does procurement overcome the challenges of establishing a deep engagement with the legal function?
Sure, and I hope you can hear me now. Perfect.
Yeah, we can.
All right.
Yeah.
Technology glitches. Yeah, so I think I briefly touched upon this during a section on legal services, but in general, we are seeing that with the key trends in the market, specifically, let's say from an inflationary as well as from a talent retention aspect, with wages and therefore rates going up. And the primary focus of the chief legal officer and his number one priority, according to a survey, is controlling outside counsel costs. I don't think there is a better time in history probably where the stage is almost set for procurement to have a much deeper engagement and show the real value. So the question really is on the how. Is probably going through the levers as we talked about around on an effective preferred supplier panel, managing budgets and really having a very good cost discipline, not just an overview, but really a cost discipline. And then where procurement plays a unique role is in the fact that you can really go into matter management tools to look at how different firms in same geographies or firms working across different geographies for the same matters, what are the kind of levers that I can play on? They have good visibility into data and is able to bring that value really back to the function to say, these are the top 3 or 4 things you should do to reduce your outside counsel costs. So it's really set up in that manner right now, and it's a strong priority as we see across all our clients. So it's really time where procurement, and it's not just procurement alone, but also with the able help of the finance function to be able to tackle these problems for legal.
Okay, thanks, Anish. That's really helpful. So just looking, we've got a couple of other questions that have come through. So Paul, just on travel, actually, there's two sort of questions here. I suppose they're slightly different, but perhaps you can take them together, or maybe separately if I kind of talk through them. So just from a travel perspective, just to sort of highlight, what are the key emerging challenges and opportunities in the travel space? And I guess the second question, maybe it's slightly different, but I'll read it out anyway. So what's your recommendation to deal with some of the key challenges and reduce the associated risks and exposures that they create? So perhaps you can take them separately. Is probably the easiest way of doing it.
Yeah. So it's just, you can hear me. Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So yeah, I think the biggest challenge that's sort of come out of the pandemic now is really the demands of the consumer and the world really now pushing for environmental and green energy really. I think it's very much got escalated because everybody's stopped traveling, and there's been a lower sort of carbon elements tracked and measured through us all being sat in our homes and not traveling on motorways or freeways, autobahns or whatever, and so there's been a lot less sort of smog in cities. That's been recognized, and I think a lot of people have stepped back and say, oh wow, if we did this, it would actually make a difference around this. And so having that sort of watershed period of stopping traveling and then looking to come back to travel, and as I said, sort of recalibrating that travel program, I think everybody has said, well, actually this is something that's really important now, and this is what we want. And so the challenge of pushing these suppliers to think very innovatively, and make that transition away from the gross carbon footprints that a lot of these airlines make, and the responsibility toward harnessing a lower carbon impact in fuels and operating models, like the bits that I spoke about, is really important now, and that's the challenge now, because it's out there now, the demand is there, and as I say, there's a lot of sort of companies who are providing these programs so that you can measure your carbon footprint. They identify the travel suppliers who are making that commitment and providing a greener service or a greener environment in their hotel or accommodation in regards to that, so that you can assess them, just like you go onto Amazon and before you buy something, you look at the reviews and you look at all the specification around that sort of thing, and you make your decision before you buy, sort of thing. So I think government's policies and green initiatives are going to push ticket prices up and rates up, so brands will lose customers if they're not able to find those green strategies to meet the expectations of the public, really. So that's in answer to the first question. What was the second question again, Rob?
The second question is the emerging challenges and opportunities, and then so the second one was what are your recommendations to deal with the challenges in the space and reduce the associated risks and exposure they can create?
Yeah, so I mentioned this again in my sort of commentary. With the volatility of oil, it seems to have stabilized at the moment, but I read on the news today that Russia's gone and cut off oil to Poland, I think it was, or Germany, one of those companies, countries, I guess now. The situation in Ukraine, there's going to be spikes in coronavirus. Shanghai is currently in lockdown. That, from a UK perspective, that hasn't been very well publicized, really. Not a lot of people know that. There's about 25 million people locked up in Shanghai at the moment. So, my recommendation is for clients to review your travel policy, so you are very much prepared for emergency measures to manage a spike in coronavirus. If the situation in Eastern Europe starts spilling into NATO countries, we just don't know what's going to happen there, and that's a massive risk. Any sort of global or European organizations, they need to prepare for that, because if it is escalated, you need to be able to quickly direct your travelers what to do. as you know, spikes in coronavirus may become the normal. So you know that guidance will be channeled throughout the next few years, and they need to be you know amendable in regards to policy on that. Also, you know, digging deep into to the knowledge and the market insights from your TMCs and your air carriers to understand, you know, what green strategies, you know, and what's their green energy policy, and how is this going to be harnessed. You know, they're developing at the moment, but you know, if you can get in front of that and try and understand, you know, get ahead of the curve, and try and understand, you know, this important development really, and keep the conversation consistent, to lobby it to your travel partners, because it's important and it's growing in demand. So you know, it's been 2 years since we've experienced a normal sort of travel program. Data management has had these 2 years really to advance, skill up on analysing the trips. There hasn't been very much trips, okay? So they can sort of prepare that foundation over the last 2 years, so that, you know, there's a great opportunity to develop this internally or with your TMC to mine out those opportunities as that program starts ramping up. So you're not sort of thrown in or parachuted in without a machine gun, as my old boss used to tell me. You know, it's slowly going to start ramping up, so you can start building that as that does actually ramp up. All right, Rob.
Okay, yep, brilliant. Thank you, Paul. That's really great. See if we've got another question. So there's one here just in relation to fleet. So I guess I'll take this one. So I'll ask the question of myself. So we're currently exploring the electrification of our fleet program. Recognise the sustainability agenda that you talked through. So whilst the environmental benefits are clear, the real challenge that we face is the cost benefits are harder to justify. So how are other companies overcoming this? Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly common challenge. This, and it probably can depend on the size of your fleet and the type of fleet that you have. Is it commercial fleet versus sort of a job need stroke benefit type fleet? I'll talk about it in kind of a broad sense. So I guess our experience of this is, you know, when we're working with clients and they are effectively looking at the purchase price or the monthly leased rental of a vehicle in isolation, you know, the difference between an electric vehicle and a petrol and diesel vehicle is inevitably different. Electric cars are more expensive still in the marketplace, although that is changing fairly quickly. And I guess this is one of the reasons I touched on it whilst I was talking, is why we recommend moving to a total cost of ownership model. You know, it's fairly common in the industry at the moment, but it's still surprising how many people organisations haven't moved to this, because this really considers all the costs involved in running your fleet. So not just the rental, or indeed the maintenance or account fees, which are kind of typical in that monthly rental or gross monthly rental, but also things like fuel and tax. So obviously fuel, we're seeing record highs across Europe for you know, cost per litre. You know, tax. You know, most European governments now have in place schemes that benefit both employee and employer. So when these kind of factors are kind of introduced into the equation, what we find is over the total life of the vehicle, the cost argument is really strong. At worst, it's cost neutral. In most cases, actually, it's a cost benefit to move to electric vehicles. It may be modest at the moment, it may be small at the moment, but there is a cost benefit to move there. The other factor. The other factor is that you know, we have you know, there's a big benefit in relation to employee tax breaks across Europe, and you know, I look at this, you know, given the current challenges, cost of living challenges, this is a real value to employees, and we link that back into reward and benefit, particularly when we're looking at reward and benefit cards. You know, that's kind of a real key area, a real key benefit to look at. So that's how we're generally approaching it. Okay, we've had another question come in. Let me just see. So if there's no category experts, is it okay that the business follows changes in the category? So I guess just trying to understand that question. So I guess if there's no kind of category experts that exist within your organization, you know, is it okay for the organization to, I guess, effectively follow the market, what's happening in the market space? I guess I would probably change this, turn this around and say, you know, look, GEP, we have category experts, and we would be more than happy to help and support in that space. I think, and you can reach out to any of us on the call to do that. I guess for me, you know, it's about challenging the business in the main, in the right way. You know, to make sure that you know, they're not just accepting what's happening in the market. We know the world is challenging at the moment. We know prices are increasing. We know demand and supply is all out of kilter. But there are things that can be done, and those things can translate from different categories, whether that's travel into fleet, whether that's temporary labour into professional services. So I think there are different things that you can do. So maybe no category expert in that particular field, but perhaps there are in others. I don't know if anybody else wants to add on to that point. If not, I think what we'll do is, I think we've kind of come up to time. There's a few other questions, so we'll have a look at those and see if we can reply more generally to people. So just to close this out, really. So look, thank you very much for your time on the call today. We know it's a big investment for you guys to join these types of calls. We hope you found it useful and insightful across these particular category areas. We've certainly enjoyed presenting to you guys. So thank you for that. As I say, if there are any questions, or if you want to explore any of these areas in more detail, please feel free to reach out to any of us, either via our kind of GEP emails, which would generally follow our name, and gep.com, or you can obviously connect with us on LinkedIn or Twitter or different platforms as well. So with that, I would just say thank you very much again, and hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to speak to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.